Good morning, and welcome to this most important session about rural development. We have two distinguished speakers. The third speaker, Professor Babaoğlu, is not here because he is at his hometown and this is related to the elections ongoing in this country. So he apologizes. It means we have two speakers this morning in the session. So you have 25 to 30 minutes each, and then we have time for questions at the end. Ladies and gentlemen, in my lifetime, the world population doubled. So in 60 years' time, we have 2 times more people on the planet. And everybody needs food. So food security in those days is really an issue if you look to global development. Zero hunger is the second goal in the Sustainable Development Goals. And it is closely related to the first one, no poverty. In this session, we will hear more about those developments and especially what can be done to avoid a situation where we have hunger and poverty. The first speaker is Dr. Klaus. Dr. Klaus is director of the Hans Seidel Foundation and he is representative of the office of Shandong in the People's Republic of China. He is a geodesist, so Dr. Klaus, you are amongst colleagues, from the Technical University of Munich. In 2003, he received a doctoral degree in sustainable land development. His specialization is geodetic engineering and management. Dr. Klaus presents rural developments for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, fostering the rural-urban relationship. Dr. Klaus, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm dealing with the development of rural areas, and I have to point out that I will not only focus on the aspect of agricultural production, because agricultural production can in 2 ways not be achieved. In one way not, because we don't have enough land for agriculture, and in the second hand, it cannot be achieved if there are no people in the countryside which are presently dealing with the agricultural sector and the point of agricultural production. So rural development, or also the development of rural area, it's very important. The definition of rural development has evolved throughout the time. The rural development not only means agricultural development, it's much more than that. Rural development is a strategy and it follows a continuous process to improve economic and social life of rural people. The growth of agriculture and rural sector of developing countries has a much more greater impact in reducing poverty and hunger than to urban and industrial growth. And from my background, I'm presently working with the Chinese government, the Ministry of Natural Resources, former Ministry of Land and Resources, in the sector of strengthening the rural areas. The Chinese government has seen that there is a very strong involvement, and with the last year party convention in October, it was pronounced that revitalization of rural area is a very important topic. Why it's like this? So the rural development is inevitable for attaining the Sustainable Development Goals. Lemmen just mentioned the SDG 1 and 2, but I think the rural development contributes to much more SDGs in this. In many developing countries, over half of the population is still living in rural areas. And the SDG demands a priority to rural areas and strengthens them. We can see this in the figures. So we see here the relation between urban and rural poor. It's during the time much more improved, but still in rural area living much more poor people than in the urban area. Even the part of the non-poor persons increased. But what can we do to help that the rural areas are not lag behind the urbanized areas? Let me define some other conditions. So the Earth has lost a third of arable land in the past 40 years due to erosion or pollution. 70% of the world's food is produced in rural communities farming on small plots of land. So there is no effectivity or productivity. The wealth inequality is likely to be most acute between urban and rural communities, and more than 80% of global GDP is generated in cities. The rural people disproportionately bear the brunt of climate change impacts. So they suffer, but they also contribute to them. So how is the evolution towards the new rural development paradigm? So let's start from the left side, from the principles. Before, there was a focus on the rural areas only. It has to be transferred to the link of cities and regions. Within the key target sector, before agricultural land and rural communities have been in the focus, but we need to come to a multi-sector approach. So it covers most of the variety of geodetic work. Within the main approach, before it was project-based on green revolution or agricultural technology, and now we need to come to context-based solutions that covers economic, social, and institutional changes and involvement. The actors also changed from government institutions, donors, and farmers to a multi-agent approach with participation approaches and collaboration. And we have to come away from the idea only to go from subsidies. We have to move to the investment approach sector. Rural-urban relationship, what is it and what is it not? Generally, we refer to a two-way flow between rural and urban territories of various sizes, which are functional and structural. So we have movements of people, goods, capital, services, and information. That's very clear. This needs also very good geodetic infrastructure and spatial information. We have social transactions and administration, and we need also the governance aspect. We have the flows of technology, lifestyle, and culture. Often it's termed as rural-urban linkages. But rural-urban relationship, it's not the same like rural-urban partnership. Rural-urban relationship refer to actually operating functional linkages between urban and rural areas, whereas urban and rural partnerships refer to initiatives to formulate, adapt, and implement an integrated policy. So we have on the one side the action approach, and on the other side the strategy and policy recommendations how we have to deal. To illustrate the aspects that mentioned before, we can see here in the slides that we need a very, very good fundament before we come to the linkages between urban and rural areas. So we need a very good economic structure based on infrastructure or other form of economic investment within the rural areas. We need a spatial structure. This means also to have a very sound territorial planning and a definition of policies to interact between urban and rural areas. And we need the right governance structure to apply all the tools which are given that the rural areas are not lagging behind. And what I try to illustrate here is that we have not a one way from the rural areas to the urban areas, as is often done by the migration from the rural areas to the urban areas, but needs also to open the way back. In my pilot project in China, we are presently discussing also one pilot approach where it should be allowed that people from the urban area also can go back to the rural areas and make investments and choose the living conditions there. Mainly approaches which we need is the service provision for the rural areas, and to make clear that environment goods and assets are kept and serve as well as for the rural areas and the urban areas. And we need also to make clear that the physical distance can be overcome by infrastructure measures so that a two-way flow from the process is possible. What's the rationale for enhancing rural and urban relationships? To reduce the inequality between urban and rural areas, it's the most important approach. It's to reduce the negative effects of urbanization, for example, rural-urban migration, and we need a significant rural-to-urban shift. To ensure sustainable regional development through economic dynamics, social links, and environmental synergies. This is laid down in a lot of global agendas. So here, for example, the European development strategies, we have the Marrakesh Declaration, a new urban agenda, and recently, as pointed out, we contribute to the social development goals. This is focusing on the target 11. The UN Habitat defined 10 points which are related to influence urban-rural linkages from different perspectives. So we need the spatial flow of products, services, and information, and expertise between urban and rural areas. We need to reduce the environmental impact in urban and rural-urban convergence. We need urban and rural continuum in the face of conflicts and disasters. We need mobility and migration between urban and rural areas. Rural urbanization means the development of small and intermediate towns, not all the big agglomerations. So in a kind of easy access centers which provide services for the rural areas and avoid the big migration tools and ways. The territory and spatial planning for balanced urban and rural development, I mentioned before, is a very important base for the interaction. We need the food security systems and the sustainability chain of all. We need an enhancing legislative governance and capacity for urban-rural partnerships. And we need an inclusive investment and finance in both urban and rural areas. A global partnership on promoting urban and rural linkages. So this brings me to the three main points that we have to act and discuss later, maybe in the discussions. So I can compromise my presentations in three I's. So one is the improving connectivity between urban and rural areas. We need an investment in the rural sector, and we need institutional partnerships that help to implement the ideas from different actors, from government actors and non-governmental organizations in a combined and partnership way. So we have to come away from the point of competition to a point of joint measures. How I'm dealing presently on this work within China and with the Chinese government in a mutual way to improve different things. First, a short idea on the Seidel Foundation. It's one of the political foundations in Germany. They receive the money directly from the German Parliament, and we have also reserved funds within the Ministry for Development Cooperation, so we can apply for projects that will be financed out. We are running 100 projects in more than 60 countries, and the core concern of the international cooperation is fighting poverty and to enhance the sustainable development. We are working since 1987 in China and since 1989 with the Chinese government on the base of rural development, development of rural areas. We have totally 4 pilot projects where we really try to improve the things we had before. So we jointly testing in our pilot projects new approaches with the support of the Chinese governments, where they try to find out which models can work for new approaches, which will be later transferred to institutional changes and legislation. As I told before, presently the rural areas receive a very high focus from the Chinese government, and we try to promote rural development to create living conditions in rural and urban areas. So before I mentioned we need to work on the topic that we try to avoid the shifting of people from the rural area to the urban area, but it is only possible if they have adequate living conditions in rural areas. Before I mentioned also the topic that the farming, it's not very productive. So if I have very small farm households, they are not meaning they are not able to produce the food to nutrient the whole society. But on the other side, if I enhance the productivity, it means a lot of people are falling out from the work in the agricultural sector. So this means we need offers for different jobs, offers for other services, and it means an investment on the government in education, infrastructure, possibility funding for economic models to set up new income sources for the rural population. It's an establishment of a seminar and coordination center to promote rural development in China. According to our models in Germany, we try to implement a center where farmers can learn, in addition, to deal with participative processes to formulate their goals. And on the other hand, we are using also the center for further training of staff from China and setting up conferences to bring in the new ideas of development together with the China Land Surveying and Planning Institute and the China Land Consolidation and Rehabilitation Institute. We're developing a model project for land consolidation and village renewals, especially in Western China, where we have different approaches to enhance the living conditions. So I really want to say that rural land consolidation projects, they mean on the one hand the food security, but on the other hand also to provide the base for having no poverty in creating also value chains. For the value chains, we are using vocational training schools, which are specially focused on agricultural products, which had been established in the same time as our training center. So we are working since 30 years hand in hand. I mentioned already that we conduct training for professionals and managers. We try also to establish an organizational network between research, education, advice and administration. This together also with the Commission aid of the FIG, which is also where also the Chinese institutions we are dealing with are represented. And we try to help and advise on development of cooperative structures in rural areas. So I know that could be only a very brief overview on urban-rural linkages. What I really want to say, we have a multi-sectoral approach. So, and we need on the one hand the real geodata to deal with the topics. So we need cadastre, land register, we need the possibility to implement the infrastructure that is necessary to deal with the rural areas. We need also the discipline of land management within the geodetic sector, so land consolidation, but land consolidation always combined with the village renewal. So I hope I could open a wide span for the discussions, and I thank you for listening, and I hope we will later in the discussion have some interesting exchange. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Klaus. Ladies and gentlemen, may I invite you to keep your questions till the end of the session. So we continue with the second presentation, provided by Mr. Jawad Peikar from Afghanistan. Mr. Peikar is a lawyer from background, and he is Chief Executive Officer of the Afghanistan Independent Land Authority. With the establishment of the High Council of Land and Water under the leadership of His Excellency, the President Mohammed Ashraf Ghani, he has become member of the Council and also manages the Secretariat of the Council. Mr. Peikar is a member of the Cabinet of the Government of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. During the last conference, World Bank Conference on Land and Poverty, there was a lot of attention to the developments in Afghanistan, especially in relation to tenure security and land administration and the developments for the next decade. So the presentation will be most exciting, and it is about learning from best practices towards a sustainable land administration system in Afghanistan. Mr. Peikar, the floor is yours.
Mr. Chair and honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. As it has been mentioned, my presentation is more on sustainable land administration system in Afghanistan, but it definitely leads to some of the very important issues related to rural and urban development. For the benefit of time, as I have been warned, I should not go more than 25 minutes. I'm trying to touch base on 5 important issues in this presentation and then 1 slide conclusion. The first, I will touch base on Afghanistan, that everybody knows about it. Second, some land facts. Then I will discuss history of Afghanistan land administration. And then land-related challenges in Afghanistan we have, and also what ARAZI has done in terms of defining rules of the game, and as well as what are the key program and projects we have for land administration. And then I would have the conclusion remarks. I'm sure you all know that Afghanistan is located geographically South Asia. For some reasons, I don't know. But we have 6 neighbors, 3 on our north border, and China is on our east, Iran is on our west, and Pakistan has a long border with us toward our east and south. So I'm sure you know more about this, and let me give you some details about Afghanistan as a fact. We're one of the oldest probably state, by definition in the region. Our history goes 5,000 years ago. Our ancient name was Aryana, and our medieval name was Khorasan, and its modern name is Afghanistan. So Afghanistan has been established in 1747 with a new name. By 2047, we will become 300 years old. So if you want to compare our age, Pakistan by then will become 100 years old. and has always been a buffer state between the superpowers, and we have 32 million population. Our country is a landlocked country, and it's 652,230 square kilometers. GDP is 1,100 USD, but Afghanistan living standards are among the lowest in the world. Some facts on the land. We think we have 65 million hectares of land with 7.8 million hectares agricultural land, 30 million hectares pasture, and then 8 desert lands, 1.9 forest, 17.5 million hectares of mountains over shore, and rocky areas. Between 1965 to 1978, only around 34% of agricultural land in Afghanistan has been surveyed with the coordinates and has not been updated since then. Only less than 30% of properties in urban area are registered, and 10% of property in rural area are registered within state institutions. That's to say, more than 80% of properties in Afghanistan are unregistered. In our system, court has a strong role in land administration, and I'm coming to more slides later to discuss further on this. For the benefit of time, I'm trying to use this diagram to discuss 5 stages of land administration history. What is the land administration like, and who the implementing institutions were, and the land concept and the outcomes. In terms of the land administration, the first late 19th century, it was more of like taxation based. And for the first time, the private ownership has been recognized in 1923, and it was traditional land management. So for the first time, the young king, Amanullah Khan, actually introduced private ownership. The implementing institutions were usually kings in this period, Ministry of Finance initially, and tribes GIRoA, so we did not have national land system. And the land concept were mostly state land. The taxation was even commodity-based, and land were used mostly for agriculture purposes. Taxation improved in this area, in this period. Private ownership was introduced, tax base was listed, monetary taxation was introduced as well. In 60s and 70s, we had a trend for modernization of land administration, like many other developing countries in that region. We established a small unit to register land and distribute land, state land, and then we established Cadastre Institute in Kandahar and brought Philippine professors to teach the new generation on Cadastre. Then the new graduates between 1965 to 1978 saved 34 to 33 to 34% of agricultural land. Again, the implementing institutions were the presidents and the kings, then Ministry of Interior by then, and then Ministry of Finance again, and we had a high council with some ministers and the king, and then the special court to take care of the land issues. The land was mostly at the land concept level. It was a state, public, and private, and we introduced progressive taxation in this period, and it was kind of a moderate distribution of land, not very radical. Survey Institute was established as an outcome. Professional surveys were trained, and 34% of agriculture was surveyed. Proper books made for taxpayers, and the problem was, in this period, though we call it a rather better period for land administration, but was not sustainable. So nothing led to security land to know, nothing led to land registration in this period. Then the radical time, 80s, 90s, especially in our region and where Afghanistan is located, Russia invaded Afghanistan, and communists introduced radical policies for land administration. Acquisition without compensation was an issue, and then conditional private ownership. So basically private ownership was questioned, which is against our values and our history. The implementing institutions were the Communist Party, Ministry of Agriculture, so they took the institution responsibility to Ministry of Agriculture, and provincial district level special committees, mostly by communist people and party. The concept was public, cooperative, and private lands, and building and estate properties. So this was an interesting type of concept for land. And it was really oxymoron land regulatory. they consecutively issued new decrees, but they are contradicting each other. The outcomes was the land reform was not implemented with most of the part of the country. It was quite unpopular among the people, and it was stopped in 1987 by the last president of the communists. But then again in 1994, again it was stopped by Mujahideen. In this period, I'm not talking about time where Mujahideen was in power and the Taliban, because nothing happened, basically, except they rejected every single thing Communist Party did. So, but there was not any substitution offered, both by the Mujahideen, neither by Taliban. 2002-2013, we called New Afghanistan. In the New Afghanistan, again, we have been witness of good investments, but it was all donor-led projects, some huge investments in land administration and GIS, but not sustainable, weak and corrupt government institutions, not ownership. The implementing institutions were male, board ministers, no capacity, and NGOs were very active. Land concept was private, public, and state with ambiguous definition. So no interest for the strong property rights, not priority for the government. So land was not really a priority for government. And then what was the outcomes? Land grabbing. Land grabbing increased drastically, fake documents, and misuse of state land, weak governments, and land projects as islands. So we did not have a systematic national land system all the way up to 2013. Now I'm talking about what's happening now, post-2014. Good steps have been taken. Regulatory environment reform, non-biased policies, follows international good practice. As you might have been in some of our sessions, we discussed the IDPL that we're working with Turkey. Implementing institution where Afghanistan Independent Land Authority was established in May 2013. High Council of Land and Water, led by His Excellency, was established. ARAZI became the secretariat, and strong political support, land became a national agenda. The land concept, it's now private, public, state, and community land. So basically we had a community land as well. A state guaranteed titling is the policy we have accepted. The outcomes was new national land policy, long-term vision, we call it 50-year roadmap, implementing a strategy for the roadmap, good governance, sustainable land administration system by implementation of IDPL. Now, what are some of the challenges we have? Some of the challenges we have, or very summary of it is here. First, more than 80% of the property and lands are not registered. It's a big challenge for ARAZI. The 34% had been surveyed in 60s that do not have coordinates and have not been updated since then. It's even more problem. 70% of Kabul, the capital city, is informal settlements. And you can apply the formula across the cities in the country. Some of the paper land records were either changed illegally or destroyed during the Civil War. Approximately 500,000 hectares of state land have been grabbed by the powerful people. ARAZI has listed 15,831 powerful, all-related powerful individuals have been listed as land grabbers. 355 small townships have been illegally built on state land or fake documents. Now, security threat to ARAZI personnel from land mafia is another issue. These are the challenges, but these challenges do not stop ARAZI, that's for sure. Now, what we have done, we have introduced rules of the game, how to tackle all these challenges we have. First, we introduced national land policy, which is pro-poor, pro-women, and futuristic. Provide every Afghan with access to land, promote ensure secure land tenure system, encourage the optimal use of land resources, enabling an efficient system of land administration, and ensure that land markets are efficient, equitable, environmentally sound, and sustainable to improve productivity and alleviate poverty. We have amended land management law. The new land management law addresses fundamental issues. Administrative land administration has been introduced. As I mentioned before, the court had very strong role. Community land introduction, village land commission, gender neutrality, fighting corruption, prevention. We have now, reinstituted 400,000 GIRips of land back from the land grabbers, and we have established special court for land grabbers. Now, fighting corruption is very serious here. More streamlining land lease process I will discuss later. private sector to allow to do land survey. So for the first time, we're allowing private sector to do land survey in Afghanistan, and accepting customary documents as an ownership document when we do land registration. The second rules of the game we introduced was land acquisition law, that it's fair and early compensation for affected people. Having a law background or a lawyer by training, I think this should be the best land acquisition law in that region. So it covers both rural and urban. We didn't have for a rural land acquisition law before. Resettlement section in the law, we didn't have it, we have it now. Compensation, directly and indirectly affected people. It's really just and fair and market value compensation. Land acquisition leads to welfare and all kinds of occupants of the lands considered for some sort of compensation and incentives. We have a long-term vision, we have mission, we have objectives. Our vision is an independent, effective, and efficient public institution that provides transparent land services, contributing to stability and growth. I'm sure you have been in some of our sessions on IDPL, that it is our national programmatic approach for land registration. And then we have some projects which can be really covered under this. What IDPL is a holistic approach in terms of transferring know-how and technology to modernize land administration in Afghanistan, learning from more than 70 years of experience of Turkey over 5 years. IDPL is a programmatic approach, learning from success story and its application with high legal and political support, putting the right and modern infrastructure for land administration for the first time in Afghanistan. IDPL will lead to parcel-based land registration and will, of course, the title deed based on the parcel will be guaranteed by the state. IDPL has 2 components, we discussed it before, geo-information infrastructure with sub-components of geodetic infrastructure and base mapping, land information system, and ICT. Under land administration, we have the cadastre and land register. And under the capacity building and land policy, we have the land code and technical training institute. Anyway, this slide is actually showing our flag as well. It's black, red, green, so I don't know if that's interesting. And ARAZI for the first time established, so now I'm discussing with a couple of projects we have which are actually complementing the IDPL implementation. It is not programs. IDPL is our umbrella program, but then it's a project to tackle some of the constraints we have. As I mentioned before, good number of state land has been grabbed, so we have recently established land bank. So based on a presidential decree, ARAZI for the first time established the land bank. We have hired 123 new young professionals from Polytechnic University. I'm happy that Mr. Peikar is here, the president for KPU, and the Professor Saraj and Sultani Seb accompanying us as member of the new session has been established to become member of FOIGO hopefully by Friday. And we have actually, with their support, we hired these young professionals. We trained them, we sent them to 28 provinces. And only over 1 month of their work, they have inventoried or surveyed 20,000 hectares of state land in these 28 provinces, and we're planning to survey 200 hectares of land during 2018 and 400 hectares of land, state land in 2019. By that, it really enforces what Mr. Klaus talks about, rural and urban development. If there's no land, land is factor of production. So the first thing we should have where the land are and then to be used efficiently. The surveyed state land can be used for all kind of development and will be secured from any further illegal grabbing. The second and very ambitious program we have is registration of informal settlements. As I mentioned before, Kabul as a capital city, 70% is informal. So this is a very interesting project that later will be covered by IDPL at a later stage. Afghanistan cabinet recently has passed a new regulation based on which ARAZI, with the support of respective municipalities, can register informal settlements and issue occupancy certificate. AU and USAID supporting us financially. UN Habitat is actually the technical partner on this. The interesting thing, the tangible outcomes we have had so far. It's completely unprecedented in the region, probably in most of the countries in the world. So far, more than 422,000 houses have been surveyed in 8 cities only. Till end of 2018, it will cover 722,000 houses. And by 2020, 1 million houses will be surveyed, and we will issue occupancy certificate for them. The OC, or occupancy certificate, will be issued under the names of men and women if the house is built on state land. So this has been actually envisaged, and the new regulation has been approved by the cabinet, and completely unprecedented for a country as traditional country like Afghanistan or in South Asia. Another good project we're working is taking over the deed registration. As I mentioned before, only around 20% of properties are actually registered with the state institution, particularly the courts. So the new land management law envisaged provides clear instruction that ARAZI may take over the responsibility of deed registration from the court. The protocol has been prepared. Hopefully soon we will sign between ARAZI and the Supreme Court to take over the deed registration. With this important move, of course, for the first time, deed registration will be administrative process, and it definitely improves Afghanistan's ranking in the DBI and other international indicators and indexes drastically. The other projects we are using state land for development is distribution of estate land for retainees and IDPs. Based on a new decree, ARAZI will be distributing estate land to retainees and IDPs and issue title deeds under the names of the heads of the family we call husband and wife. The retainee with the new concept are not seen as a social problem anymore. We see retainees as an opportunity to distribute state land and to attract investments. We only have $10 billion in Peshawar of Pakistan from the Afghan refugees. So we're planning to distribute industrial parks, mega farms, agribusiness activities, and agricultural villages for the new retainees. Approximately, we're expecting 2.5 million Afghans only from our two neighboring countries in coming 2 years as retainees. And we have around 2 million IDPs, internally displaced people within the country. So land and the important thing about this new project is the land selection and the beneficiary selection are done in a very transparent way with a very high involvement of UN and international agencies. This is my last project that ARAZI has been involved. We have simplified access to land for commercial purposes. As you know, ARAZI is the custodian for state land as well. And this is really promoting the theme of this plenary, which is rural development. ARAZI has awarded 3,242 contracts, mostly to farmers and companies. We have created 27,000 jobs over 4 to 5 years, and we have attracted more than $580 million investments, direct and indirect investments on the state land. The very two small things we have done that led to very tangible outcomes. One, in order to have access to state land, you had to go through 52 steps or 52 signatures. We actually decreased it to 9 signatures. And this decrease of the steps to access to state land for commercial purposes actually saved a lot of time for investors and farmers. And the transaction cost actually decreased drastically. That only when we calculated the time spent from 52 to 9 steps actually saved $17 million over 5 years for private sector. Definitely the increased income was another good important thing. Last not the least, my last slide is my final remarks. Keeping in mind the theme of the session, and as well as keeping in mind that ARAZI is doing land administration and land management, and of course this all leads to rural and urban development. Land administration in Afghanistan is being transformed in a very modern and sustainable system. Since 2014, ARAZI has been working hard to modernize Afghanistan's land administration system. We know our constraints, and we have thought about the solution very carefully. ARAZI, in practice, in actual, applied one-stop shop for land management and land administration system. It has the high political support for its IDPL program we discussed in other sessions, and as well as the projects I just discussed before today. ARAZI is quite a young institution, but fast-paced. Good reputation with tangible outcomes, clear vision, mission, and roadmap. ARAZI jointly developed IDPL with the TKGM of Turkey with technical oversight of the World Bank, FAO, and Peikar. It's committed to implement the program with support of the TKGM over 4 to 5 years. ARAZI believes secure land tenure promotes efficient use of land and leads to sustainable land administration, of course, urban and rural development. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Peikar. I'm sorry, my voice. I'm sorry, I apologize. It sounds like a revolution what is ongoing in Afghanistan. And I think the developments will be in the focus of attention, not only in Afghanistan, but also outside. I mean, it is very exciting what is going on. And I think if this is a success, the world can learn from it. The world can learn from it. It is fantastic. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, as I announced in my introduction, the third speaker, Professor Babaoğlu, is not here because of duties related to the ongoing elections in Turkey. But I can announce now that our president, Professor Pochu, suggested to introduce a third keynote to the program. And that is a keynote to be presented by Brent Jones from Esri, United States. It is a presentation that he did give yesterday to the Director General's forum. I have information that it is a very good speech, Brent, and it is related to the professional agencies and challenges and actions to be taken. I think we all know Brent. He has a background in surveying and geodesy and responsibilities within Esri related to cadastre and land management, and of course in an ICT environment. Well, I have to say our president is flexible. I am flexible. Brent is flexible. I think we all are flexible because we are here. The coffee is not yet ready. So, Brent, we are very happy that you want to give this keynote. The floor is yours. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Crit. Yeah, this is a bit ad hoc. This is a presentation prepared for the Director General's Forum. A lot of what you'll see applies to urban and rural development looking forward, and I think the first two presentations showed what can be accomplished. I was asked to talk about robotics and artificial intelligence, and on the way here, I began to read this book. I didn't finish it. I was about halfway finished. How many people have read I, Robot by Isaac Asimov? A few. It was written in 1950, so I was thinking that, you know, when we try to look forward, it's nice to look back to see what looking forward was like 50 years ago. They got most of it wrong. And we'll probably get most of it wrong looking forward, but we have to keep trying. Because who thought that the world's largest media company would have no journalists, no receptionists, and no photographers? The world's largest hospitality company has no receptionists, no rooms, and no free breakfast. The world's largest database has no operating system, no infrastructure, and no database administrators. The world's largest currency has no vault, no bank tellers, and no drive-up window. Although they do have some ATMs now that you can actually deposit and withdraw on the Bitcoin. And the world's largest transportation company has no cars, no manufacturing, and no repair facilities. What's this mean for us if we look at the first, second, third, and fourth revolution? We are in the middle of the fourth, and I don't think we can predict that we're going to where this is going to end up. We're not through the fourth revolution. The enabling technologies of what is causing this disruption is what's really interesting. We're looking at transportation as a service. We're looking at hospitality as a service. We're looking at cadastre as a service. We're looking at mapping as a service. There are agencies around the world that have sold their registry systems to the private sector. There are agencies that are selling their cadastral systems and taking a fee for service. This is all enabled by the cloud, which really can mean somebody else's computer, and as a service just means that someone else is doing the work. As economies specialize, as economies grow, they specialize, and as a service will continue to grow. How does all this affect our work? We've all seen the Google cars. These are kind of cool. There's a lot of sensors on top of that car. They even know if your house has wireless or not. Okay, they didn't just take pictures. They didn't just do a little bit of LiDAR. They have all kinds of sensors in there. They know a lot about your house. This also moves into the private sector beyond Google, where a company out of the Netherlands, Cyclomedia, can map the front door of your house to 1 centimeter. It's pretty amazing technology. But the disruption, that was not the disruption. The disruption is occurring when a group of German car companies got together and bought one of these world data set companies, street-level data set. So as we look at autonomous driving, these German car companies can turn every car they own into a sensor. That's pretty disruptive. So what's this mean for us? Will robots take our jobs? That's a good question, right? Are we worried about this? Just go to willrobotstakemyjob.com and you can ask this question. And if you are an assessor or an appraiser of real estate, you're doomed. 90% of the functions of real estate assessors will be replaced by automation. So what does this mean for us? You know, you can look at some of the modern measurement tools. An electronic distance measurement tool, which we all used in our early years, didn't do much more than the rope. It was a bit more accurate. But what we're doing now with LiDAR and the new types of sensors and imagery is a disruptive and leapfrog technology, much more than just distance measurement. So how do we evolve? We've all probably seen this graphic before. We've evolved into surveyors, and now we've evolved into our desk chairs. But what happens next? When we look at the whole landscape of land administration, of tenure, value, use, development, and ultimately the land market, we develop land data, we develop services on top of that data, and then applications on top of that. That's our traditional approach. But with artificial intelligence, there's a new paradigm of how we collect that data and how we provide information and services. So artificial intelligence tells us a lot of things, but the next level is machine learning, where we can actually train machines, train computers in what we're trying to think and what we're trying to do, which leads into deep learning, where machinery does a lot of our work for us. This is not on the horizon. This is happening now. This is the big shift that's taking place. You know, there's a lot of talk about autonomous cars, and it's going to happen in some form or another. But we've been working for 30 years to have autonomous driving trains, and they drive on tracks, and we have a hard time doing that. So what an autonomous driving car looks like in the future may not be you sitting there with your hands off the wheel. There may be other things happening. So as we envision this autonomous car that just does everything, it probably won't do everything, but it will do most things, but we don't know exactly how it's going to play out. And sentiment analysis, this is used all over the world for taking Twitter feeds, taking tweets, parsing the words out of them, and understanding how people feel in different parts of a city where a protest is going to erupt. It's pretty interesting stuff. And our area that we're probably most interested in is automatic feature extraction. I'm not going to go into these slides, the next two slides, but they're in here for your use. One is going to show you who's investing in technology in machine learning, and who's acquiring companies and spending money in machine learning. So with GIS, there are machine learning tools that we're using now. We can classify, we can cluster, and we can predict. What prediction is really letting you take the known to predict the unknown. I think we've all probably heard the first law of geography, that things that are near each other are more like each other, or more likely to be alike than things that are further away. And interestingly enough, there's no second law of geography. But we can use these traditional cartography tools of kriging and regression for understanding and how to predict. We can cluster, which we base on similar values in a location, in a small geography. Applying geospatial weighted regression to clustering actually allows valuations to take place with limited amounts of data. You'll see a lot of growth of this. And this is kind of one of my favorites, is classification, because we do this now. Almost everybody does this now, but this is actually growing really quickly, and this is where we apply the machine learning capabilities. So as you recognize the shape of a building, as you recognize how a road applies an imagery, processing can do that work automatically. It's not done inside GIS, though. It's done with some pretty powerful computing objects, the TensorFlow, and of course we all know Watson. These, we interface with these learning machines that deliver back to us. Now, we can detect these things from imagery, and we know that, we know this has been done in the, for those of you in the military or on the defense side of things, this has been done for targeting for many years. But with these low orbit satellites, that are about the size of a baseball, that are nearly disposable, we can do this and find parking places. So we can real-time scan the Earth and understand where there's available parking. And hopefully this video runs. Okay, good. This looks simple, all right? But this is automatically understanding where the road is and drawing the road center line. I remember when I was in school and I drew a line on a Tektronix graphics display, and I drew that line out of a database. I took the rest of the day off. It was quite an accomplishment. Drawing a line today in a computer is no feat at all. This kind of work looks like it's nothing very important. When this gets automated and in production, it will change the way we map planimetrically. This image doesn't look very exciting either, but this is actually using AI to detect what is a road and what is not a road. It looks like a simple image, but there's a lot of information behind this. Now, hopefully this one plays, because this is kind of an interesting one. So this is a camera in a traffic intersection. And in the lower left-hand corner, AI is deciding what those vehicles are. Are they cars? Are they buses? Are they people crossing the street? What exactly are they? And it's putting a level of confidence on what they are. That information is being aggregated and collected and displayed in dashboards. And if we had more time, I would play this all the way through, which would show how you understand traffic in an entire city, how you adjust traffic signals for an intelligent transportation system. The automated mapping with LiDAR, many of you may be doing this. This is pretty cool. This is automatic feature extraction from LiDAR, and not necessarily using core machine learning techniques, but using a series of logical processes to step LiDAR through to get planimetric mapping. And a lot of this value comes from combining these capabilities. We take street-level LiDAR, you add in the tax and assessment information, you add in some GIS information, some parcels, and then you can do some real intelligent valuation from sitting from your desktop. This is an area we see a lot of growth in. There is inequity in taxation across the world. And horizontal equity is that all properties that are alike are taxed and valued the same way. Vertical equity is that the lowest value properties are taxed at the same rate as the highest value properties. And this map shows that the vertical inequity in Belfast, Ireland is very high, meaning that the lower value properties are taxed at a higher rate. And we know there's no new appetite for tax, so we have to understand how to tax things at its highest value and uncover all the taxable property. And that's driving a lot of this business. And also using high resolution land cover. This is an interesting case study, 100,000 square miles, 2 terabytes of imagery, and it took 18 months to create a map of land use. Using AI, a GeoAI virtual machine, and processing this automatically, it came up with a 91% confidence level and was 16 times faster than the manual process. So, you know, if we go back to, will robots take my job? If I'm doing land classification, robots will take my job, and they may already have. Right inside the desktop, you can do these classifications as well. We're building in the CNTK convolutional neural networks into actually the desktop, so there's no external process going, and you can look at and test your theorems. So what you do is you kind of identify an area, you say you think you know what it is, you test it out, you get a probability, and then you get a classification. This is kind of a neat looking animation, and what it's showing with deep learning is how long it's going to take to go to different areas in San Francisco in under 25 minutes at different times of the day. We've all had to wait for the electric power company or the phone company to come to our house to do some installation, and they'll say, be there between noon and 5 o'clock, when really you should just be there. They should be able to predict when they can get there a lot better. Now I'm going to change the conversation a little bit into some very practical things that we can do today. This project in polio was in 9 Norwegian states, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation wanted to eradicate polio. So that's a pretty big, tall order. Depending on the strain of polio, you have to vaccinate the same person 3 or 4 times, and you have to have 85% inoculation to eradicate. That means you have to get back to the same place 3 or 4 times, and you have to find the same person 3 or 4 times. And we went down to what's called a hamlet, which are 2 structures, 2 houses, 2 shacks put together. So that's pretty detailed, pretty on the ground. There were 20,000 healthcare workers. These were not GIS people, they were not technical people. So we had to configure some technology very, very simply. And the most disruptive thing here is, of course, this device here. So what we did was configure the phone so if it was moving, we took a position every 10 seconds. If they were stopped, we assumed they were working, okay? But we needed to know where to send them and how much serum, how much vaccination to take with them. So we took some satellite imagery and tested a few algorithms for calculating population density. So we could figure out the exact population of a given area, know where to send people, and know how much serum to take with them. Now here's the trick. They had to get back to where they were, but we had breadcrumbed the phone, so we had tracked their positions, all right? Pretty interesting. So we could get them back and back. We took that same data and processed it, and we ended up with the best base map in 9 states in Nigeria from exhaust, what we call exhaust data out of a cell phone, data that you're not using. That's pretty powerful. And the good news is polio has been eradicated in Nigeria, which is thanks to Bill Gates for sure. I got a call about a year ago from a guy who wanted to take cell phone data from around Walmarts. Not the actual conversation data, but the traffic. How much traffic is in each cell phone tower? And he wanted to use that information to predict Walmart revenues. So if the traffic was high, he would think that revenues would be higher than prediction. If traffic was lower, revenues would be lower than predicted. So he wanted to develop a model for that. From an investment standpoint, he wanted to buy if he thought revenues were going to be higher, and sell if they were going to be lower. So one thing that's happening with this massive amounts of data out there is it's being used in ways we haven't thought of. Not just the technology, but the data. Another area that's pretty new and is actually getting down to very practical limits is 3D cadastre. We've talked about it a lot. It's being used now for 3D tax maps, cantilevered lots, as you can see in the upper left, and valuing what you can see out your window. We've been doing valuation based on how much sun exposure and shade exposure for some time, but we're beginning now to actually quantify the value of a view. This is getting pretty exciting. And this is all automated, by the way. This is actually, there's not a lot of mouse clicks to put all this together. This technology is maturing at a rate that is increasing rapidly. Okay, so maybe some of you view this as some bad news. Maybe some of you view this as good news. It's certainly going to change our jobs rapidly. With the automated mapping capabilities, what do we do? How do we stay relevant? Well, again, this was designed for the Director Generals, but I think it applies to pretty much everyone, so I came up with 7 rules. First is think big and think spatial. I was going to say think spatially, but Steve Jobs said think different, not think differently. So even though it's not quite exact English grammar, think big and think spatial. Use your technology to map and visualize, which you probably do now, and use it to manage your data properly. Are you supplying your data on where we do 85% of our work now? Are you supplying your data and applications on a mobile device? Are you using your technology to monitor the effectiveness and the status of work in your organization? Can you look at a dashboard and know the status of all your work and where your people are? Can you also look at a dashboard, or can you do analytics against your data, or are you just collecting and publishing data? I think the analytical component of technology is the most underutilized, and I think that's the biggest bang for your buck right now. Are you sharing your data for others to make decisions, for design and planning? And are you sharing it and collaborating it with others? Second rule is use your tools. This is, think of this like Microsoft Word. Everybody uses Microsoft Word. I probably use 7 commands or 8 commands, and there's a couple thousand commands in there. I do not use Microsoft Word to the degree I should. That's the same with spatial technology. Use it, learn what it's doing, because most of these things that I showed you are available. This is probably the most difficult for all of us, is to stay current. If we don't stay current, we're going to get behind very quickly, and that's where we get replaced. The taxi driver who got Ubered was not because they didn't drive you from point A to B. It's because they didn't come on time, you couldn't find them easily, the payment method was you had to get your credit card out, you had to do this, and they charged too much money. And the Uber effect was done because the taxi drivers were not staying current. What you see on the left are those same animations you saw, but on the right, that's full 3D cadastre done with 2D data. You have the information that you can extract and extrude and change and use your tools to create and use a 3D cadastre without having to go through the costly new mapping. Create new services, because if you don't, someone else will. If there's a demand, it will be filled. Okay, that's pretty simple. There's an old saying that people want holes, not drills. So provide them the data for those that want to build new applications, but also provide new services to answer simple questions. This one might be a bit controversial. Be free or affordable. These are the open data sites around the world that I could locate. There's one in Greenland. If Greenland can do it, we all can do it. Now, the reason you have to be free or affordable is because if you don't, someone else will. They'll create a shadow data set. It won't be authoritative, but it will get the job done for them. So you have to, this is not difficult. Every legal system, every country is different in how they approach this. But if you're not getting your data used, someone else will create data that will be used. You want to create a dependency on your data. So that's providing your data in a modern format, in modern services that can be consumed and used. And move quickly and evolve. This, Darwin actually did not say this, but I do like, it's attributed to him, and somebody said it about when they read Origin of the Species. It's not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent that survives. It's the one that is most adaptable to change. And we need to figure out how to change more quickly, or we're going to get Ubered. We really don't want to be the woolly mammoth shown on the left. And the last message is get started now. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much, Brent, for this introduction that you were not aware of this morning. So thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to open the floor now for a few questions. I think we have one question over here. Is there a microphone? Microphone is under arrival. Keith Bell from the World Bank. Keith, please. Microphone, yeah.
Firstly, congratulations to all three speakers. Brent, I sort of know how you feel, man. You got a bit more notice, a bit less notice than me. I actually wanted to be provocative, but it's mainly directed at Brent. We've seen a lot going on in the world at the moment with many of those innovations that you introduced at the beginning of your presentation. You spoke about Facebook, blockchain, Uber, and Amazon. A lot's been said about Amazon by Donald Trump, so I'm not going to say anything about that one, but there are issues. Facebook, hey, we just saw Cambridge Analytica and some of the really poor responses from the CEO of Facebook, the intrusion into personal lives. So I'm not sure that's such a great example anymore, but I'm being provocative deliberately. Blockchain, well, people have heard me talk about it. Blockchain is being exploited by oligarchs, money laundering, people trafficking, and all these other things because of the anonymous nature of distributed ledgers. It's certainly very useful for many areas, but it's considered to be a foundational technology, not a disruptive one. Uber's been crazy too, obviously not about the CEO, but in terms of the way it's put taxi drivers in many places out of business because Uber's jumped in, been able to get away around regulations, not covering people with insurance, underpaying drivers, etc., etc. So they're all great examples, but I'm wondering, I'm a baby boomer. My children are new millennials and Generation Zs. And I look on YouTube these days at about a lot of the new technologies, and I've been sharing some of the music. And you listen to the lyrics and read the words, and there's some really smart new millennials saying, hey, we've got some problems with these things that are hitting the world socially. I work in dangerous places, and I don't use social media because I know what it's like now having a damaged shoulder from having information that gets out publicly about you from a particular situation I was in. So my point is that all those things are great, but unless they're fit for purpose and are properly directed and properly regulated, they can be very, very problematic, particularly when dealing in situations like Mr. Peikar was talking about in trying to get things moving in a conflict country. 3,700 people were killed there last year. 10,500 people were blown up. Social media is being exploited by many of these extremist groups. So I'm trying to be deliberately provocative because we've been friends a long time. Cheers.
Well, you're exactly right, and I think that's indicative of a disruptive technology, that it's going to be used until it's harnessed. I think when you look back at the turn of the century with the automobile, it killed a lot of people before they got it figured out. And I think when you look at blockchain, and you look at the cloud, these are just growth areas. Blockchain is just someone else's database, distributed. The cloud is just someone else's computer. They're there because there was an opportunity. There was a seam that was exploited, and these being exploited for for malcontent, for the bad side of things, that will continue until regulation keeps up, and that will always be the case because technology moves way faster than the legal system, and that's probably something we need to figure out. Like the GDPA, that just May 24th or 25th, that's probably 5 years late, So, but you may see, I don't want to make a prediction, but the millennials, I have a couple millennials myself, and it's their time to step up and run the world. We're getting kind of tired of this. But you may see a backlash from the anonymity that they believe is not a problem now.
Thank you, Keith, for your question. We have one more question over there, please. We all would be happy if you introduce yourself.
Yeah, I am Surveyor Ayo Oku, Surveyor General of Cross River State in Nigeria. I want to thank the speakers. Good presentation. Brent, the second time I'm saying that, and it makes me think differently every time I see it. But for Afghanistan, that is a revolution in your country. I was asking for the land bank. How are you guys doing it? It's a little bit expensive for government to begin to create land banks using the old system. Governments are struggling with money to do so many other things. But now talking about land bank, I've seen you have done quite a lot in a short while. I wanted you to give us some more, clarification on how you people went to got about doing it, especially in terms of funding from the government angle. And for Brent and everybody here, I think whether we like it or not, things are changing. The quicker we begin to see how useful we can be in the changes, the better it is going to be for us. The millennia and the old, how did the last speaker call it now? Some of us are in between these two ages. And whether we like it or not, there will always be the bad guys. Technology won't stop bad guys being around. So we need to start thinking of how the surveyors are going to key into what is going on. Thank you very much. Afghanistan, can you help us? My direct question is to Afghanistan. How are you doing with money in creating the land bank in your country?
Thank you very much. Well, as I mentioned before, we have. Okay. All right.
First, thank you all for your presentations. My question is related to the one who presented about Afghanistan. It is a grand policy of land reform, but Afghanistan is also facing tremendous challenges. Civil war by the Taliban, by the ISIS. Land reform needs peace and stability. How would you tackle these challenges in your grand policy of land reform? Thank you.
Thank you very much. First, on the land bank, as I mentioned before, when you reform land administration system in a country, as we have done in Afghanistan, the first was to know what the problems are and what the constraints are. The idea of establishing land bank did not come out of the blue, but we have serious problem with keeping our land safe and using our land in a proper and efficient way. You know, Afghanistan is one of those countries we have a lot of state-owned land, but the systematic land registration has not happened. The problem was land grabbing. Land grabbing is a huge issue in Afghanistan. And unfortunately, most of the powerful people are involved, and some of them are still powerful, and they use it to their private, to their own benefits. Establishment of land bank, as mentioned before, was really fit for the purpose. Before we go to fight against them, as we have done, we have established a special court to actually sue them and talk to them and bring them before the justice. And they're a good number. There are more than 15,000 people. But they all have been listed. The lands which have been grabbed, actually, we have the exact location and information and the names of the individuals who have been using it, and for how long and what is the value of the land. But in terms of the land bank, the financing of the land bank, at this stage, it's a donor-funded project from a Danish country. The purpose is to identify state land in different areas, especially with high returnees and IDPs, and use that for that purpose. But I think land bank itself, by nature, can be more than this. You know, we are in a process of establishing, which is completely at the concept note stage, land and investment company. It will be a state-owned company, hopefully. We have completed the concept. Once we know how much land we have, I think we can clearly use those lands in a commercial, efficient way. And as Afghanistan has this problem, I'm sure most of developing countries have, we're using very high value land for our own offices in the very center of the city. And we're using it only for services which are not maybe value for the land. So for that purpose, land bank will be really itself self-financing, not only self-financing, but will be a huge source of income for the government of Afghanistan, hopefully in the midterm. In terms of challenges, I think, I'm sure whatever is in the media is not really most of the time the reality in Afghanistan. I know we're always talking about the conflicts, we're talking about Taliban, but you don't see them physically in Afghanistan. I'm telling an example of my institution. We have directorate in 34 provinces, and I have staff in 364 districts. So our total size of staff is 3,400. They're all reporting to us, and we don't physically see the international terrorism to actually manage things or to be a problem for the land administration. But definitely, we are the front line for international terrorism, and you know the international support is there on the ground for us, and we are working to fight against them. But we cannot just sit to fight against them, but I think we have to also work on development projects and programs. And you know, most of the conflicts we have in Afghanistan is land-related, basically. Probably more than 65% of whole conflicts in Afghanistan are land-related. That's because the lands have not been registered. I'm sure the new program, which is an institutional and programmatic approach, IDPL, is not only ensuring security of TNU for land in Afghanistan, but it will be a peace builder. Land registration, in my experience, I've been working as a public officer for the 5 years, is one of the best tools to ensure security and peace, not only from the social perspective. Enhancing the income for the people will definitely create incentive people to use their land efficiently. So I think we're working at the moment in Afghanistan, and the programs I've explained, they're all real. They have tangible outcomes. I talked about the cities. I talked about rural development, and definitely IDPL. And it's quite different from what we're hearing from the media. My suggestion is, as a person who worked for 10 years for government, that if you do good development projects, if you do touch and do contact people, basically you're helping peace building besides the development you will be doing. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think we have one final question. There is a microphone under arrival. Yes, please.
Öncelikle Türkiye'ye ve İstanbul'a hoş geldiniz. Tapu Müdürü Özdemir Kılıç. Efendim burada üçüncü sunucu Bay Robot adlı bir eseri okuduğunu ve bu eserin 1950 yılında yazıldığını söyledi. Bununla ilgili çarpıcı birkaç örnek verebilir misiniz? 1950 yılında yazılan Bay Robot adlı kitapta bugünü görmüş mü? Teşekkür ederim. Tekrar edeyim mi?
Yeah. Okay, there will be translation. Your question is addressed to Mr. Brent Jones. Yeah.
Teşekkür ederim. Tam anlayamadım. Ben soruyu tekrar edeyim o zaman. Konuşmacımız 1950 yılında Bay Robot adlı bir eseri okuduğunu söylemişti yanlış hatırlamıyorsam. Şimdi bu eserde günümüzü anlatabilmiş mi onu sordum. 1950 yılında yazılmış Bay Robot adlı bir eseri okuduğunu, bu eserde günümüzü yansıtabilmiş mi? Onu sordum. Teşekkür ederim.
Brent?
Thank you. The book I read, or not quite finished yet, is called iRobot, written in 1950. And the question was, did it accurately predict the future? And the answer is no. It wasn't even close.
Thank you very much. Before I close the session, I think words of thanks will be spoken by our President, Professor Potiu. So please, Chrissy. Ladies and gentlemen, please do not leave the room after this, because our FIG director will make some announcements at the end of the session that you don't want to miss.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the speakers for giving us the current approaches and challenges for managing the urban and rural areas in a more efficient way. Thank you for the Afghanistan description of the innovative policies and approaches there. And thank you, Brent, for giving us an overview of the potential of new technologies and how these technologies can help us in decision making, both in urban and rural areas. And I wish we could have some more time also to discuss the potential of new technologies and big data and geospatial intelligence in improving security all over the world. But this is another issue that we can deal with in another session. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Crit, for being here and moderating so efficiently. So this is for Michael Klaus. Thank you very much. Congratulations. Great experience to hear about Afghanistan. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chrissy. May I ask the FIG director for announcements, please, Louise.
Thank you very much. You will soon get out to your coffee, but before that, I just would like to remind you that we have a lot of interesting things going on the rest of the day. We have 14 technical sessions, and here too we also have 2 what we call inspirational short sessions where you get some really good glimpse of a lot of areas that's going on. Do not miss those. Then we have 6 different partner sessions. For instance, a session on STDM, and then there is a session on evaluation for unregistered land. Here a guidebook will be launched. This guidebook has been on its way since 2010, so this is really a remarkable time now. And there is also a session in cooperation with our partner FAO on securing tenure rights, and a young surveyors session. And you don't have to be a real young surveyors, we are all young surveyors by heart. And do not forget, now you got a glimpse this morning of what you can get in the Esri session later today. So that was an appetizer, so see what Esri has to say later today and learn more. Oh. For those who are going to the gala dinner tonight, please note that we are going with buses. So you have to be here at the entrance at the conference center, the latest at 7 o'clock. We're going to drive with buses and they are going to be on time. At last, I would like again to remind you about the FIG Foundation. Several of the young surveyors that you see around here have been funded by Foundation to be able to attend here today. And the young surveyors are the future of the surveying profession. So in several years, those should be the ones having the keynotes up here. So please help us bring future new wonderful keynote speakers. Thank you so much for now, and now it's time for coffee. And have a wonderful day.